We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Thursday edition of Point of View, and we're going to spend some time in just a minute talking about maybe some of the greetings you've heard, Ramadan Kareem or Ramadan Mubarak. What does that mean and how that fits into the issue of Islam? And I'll hold up our booklet on Islam that we are making available to you if you'd like to get a copy. Then we're going to get into some things happening at the border. Going to talk about, I love this piece by Ron Johnson. Is this any way to run a budget? We're talking about the federal budget. Also, the real questions that people are raising about what are called the Tesla terrorists, and much, much more we will cover in these 2 hours. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to give us a call at 800-351-1212. We go to an individual we've had on the program before, Dr. Hormoz Shariat. He was born into a Muslim family in Iran and then came to the United States after the Iranian Revolution in 1979. Came to Christ while earning his PhD in artificial intelligence, USC, planted a church, but probably is best known for the founding of Iran Alive Ministries, a ministry that really is reaching so many individuals in Iran and the rest of the Middle East through television. And he joins us now by phone. So thank you for joining us once again here on Point of View.
Well, thank you so much, Kerby. So much is going on, and from political point of view and also from biblical and spiritual point of view. I'm here to share.
Well, and again, one of the things we want to start with is you wrote a very good piece on here is what you need to know about Ramadan, and we're in what is called the 9th lunar month, and so as a result, it was one of the holiest periods of Islamic faith. No doubt, as you probably have traveled around, and certainly wife and I walk, we see various signs and also illustrations of people practicing Ramadan. So if you can, give us a background on what that means and what we can maybe use and how we can use that to witness to our friends.
Wonderful. Yes. First, you have to understand why they do it. Then we do have a message for them. When we know the motivation for Muslims to fast, which I did. When I was younger, I was a Muslim. I was serious. I prayed and I did fasting, especially fasting 1 month a year. And first, you have to know the motivation for Muslims. This is very important because once a year, they kind of come back to God, rededicate their lives to God, to their God. They know they have come short. They know they don't deserve His grace and His forgiveness. So they're trying that month to get closer to God, and also to let me share there's three motivations for Muslims to go on fasting. All starts with F. It's fear. Number one, fear. They fast because they're fearful of Allah. Allah is a fearful God. He puts terror, not fear. You know, in the Bible, we talk about the fear of God. It's not the fear of God. It's the terror of God. That they're terrorized by that Allah because He can hurt them by attacking their bodies, sickness, death to their family, financial. He is a cruel God in their mind. So they're fearful if they don't fast that He will hurt them. So many Muslims do fasting and praying out of fear. Not all of them, but most of them. And then another motivation for Muslims to fast is to seek forgiveness. See, if you have a little conscience, everybody, religious or non-religious, we know we are not perfect. We have flaws. And sincere Muslims, they know they do not deserve to be with God, to be forgiven. So by not eating for 1 month from sunset to sundown, they try to ask for forgiveness. God, look at me suffering for you. I'm serious about my sins. I'm so sorry about my sins. would you forgive me? And there's no assurance of forgiveness, that they don't know. They just hope that with suffering myself, not eating, maybe Allah will have mercy on me. So that's fear, forgiveness, and the number 3 motivation is favor. Many want something from their God, and they think if I suffer, I show my sincerity, my fasting, maybe He will have compassion on me. Maybe He will give me the desires of my heart. That could be like, I want to get married. That could be finances. That could be health. Whatever demand you have from God, by fasting, maybe, again, it's a maybe, He will change His mind and do something for you. So you have to understand, and each of these, of course, the Bible has something to do to each of these fears or each of these motivations. So that's understanding them. Now you know how to talk to Muslims once you know why they do it.
And one of the things I found out, and of course, again, I'm holding up our booklet that we've made available in the past to anyone that has been a donor, but if you did not get a copy of it, I do go into the 2 things you've just talked about. One, the idea of the love of God. We recognize we fear God, but God is not a terror for us if we have accepted Jesus Christ. And number 2, the issue of eternal security, that we are saved by grace through faith, not by our works, that we can know that we have eternal life, as it says in 1 John 5 and other passages. And so it does seem to me that even during this time of Ramadan, where you might have a faithful Muslim following the dictates of the Muslim faith, they really have no guarantee that God loves them. They have no guarantee that God could save them, that they would actually be saved. And it seems to me that that's one of the best ways to witness to our Muslim friends and neighbors.
That's correct. Like any type of witnessing, especially with Muslims, you cannot go and attack their faith and just right away say, hey, this fasting doesn't do you any good. Just like Paul, you have to acknowledge their heart first. Hey, I see you're seeking God, you're sincere, you're fasting, and may I ask you why you're fasting? What are you trying to accomplish? And usually it's one of these 3 that, or maybe one or more of these 3, and they seek. So first you have to, acknowledge their faith, where they are, and respect where they are. And then you can ask questions. And once you ask questions, always, that's what I've always done. Once you ask questions and you listen, by the way, asking questions and listening is the first indication of your love.
Certainly.
When you love people, you listen. So they feel loved when you ask and you listen. So that by itself connects your heart to their heart. But at the same time, when you ask and listen, always there is a way that, through their own speech and through your questions, there's always a root of gospel planted in their lives and their seeds. And you go from there.
Let me just mention we're going to take a break. We'll come back and have a lot more to cover. As a matter of fact, given the fact that we'll be talking about Iran, about 2/3 of Iranians really have rejected Islam. So this is maybe more appropriate for some of the Muslims you might know in this country. One of the things that in this article that we have posted, it's our first article on the website, pointofview.net. He has really decided to pray daily for Muslims during this month of Ramadan. I would encourage you to do the same. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more about my Muslim friends and how they celebrate Ramadan, well, that's our first article on pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
President Trump wants manufacturing reinvigorated by bringing jobs back to the U.S. That is great for America and great for American workers, but who's going to fill those jobs? The latest numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics show 7.6 million job openings along with 6.8 million unemployed workers. You might ask why those millions of unemployed workers aren't snapped up in those millions of job openings. Mike Rowe, host of Dirty Jobs, says that the problem of filling those jobs is twofold. He says we have a skills gap. We also have a will gap. The skills gap is the disparity between the skills an employer expects their employees to have and the actual skills employees possess. It is certainly true that jobs in the medical field require a science degree and jobs in big tech require a computer science degree, but most of the blue-collar skills don't require a degree but require some mechanical ability and training. Unfortunately, lots of high schools remove shop classes that could have been training the next generation of Americans who like to work with their hands. Instead, students have been convinced they should go to college, take out massive student loans to get a degree that may not even prepare them for a future job. The will gap is best illustrated by what economist Nicholas Eberstadt refers to as the flight from work. His Washington Post op-ed 3 years ago lamented that at the time there were 7 million men who were not working and not looking for work. The number of non-working men has only dropped a percentage point in the last few years. If the president is successful in bringing jobs back to America, pastors, parents, and other leaders must encourage the next generation to go to work. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of genetic engineering, go to viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. Viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us for a few more minutes Dr. Hormoz Shariat. You can go to his website, and you don't even have to know how to spell his name because we have that link on our website there, but you'll find out a lot more about his ministry. And Doctor, for just a minute, I thought we might talk about the fact that you have been praying during the month of Ramadan, and you have seen so many Muslims actually become Christians during Ramadan and find salvation. Can you talk about that for just a minute?
Amazing, because they're seeking God and they know God is distant. So when you talk about the intimate and loving God, that's very attractive to them. They want God, but where is He? What is He doing in their life? You just try to please Him so He won't hurt you? No, He is a Father. He wants to have a personal relationship. So yes, first of all, there is a revival going in Iran. So Iranians, as you mentioned, less than 1/3 say we are Muslims. Iran is no longer an Islamic nation.
Mm-hmm.
I used to say that, and people would say, hey, you're crazy, just Google it. It's 98% Muslims. No, not anymore. There was a scientific survey done by 2 university professors, and that was, as they published that, they asked 50,000 people, what do you believe? So it's a solid research. And the publication showed, as you said, less than 1/3 say we are Muslims. So Iranians are very open to every idea except Islam. And now during the month of Ramadan, many of them do not follow, do not fast. They know this is empty religion, has done nothing to them, nothing for them for the last 40 years that they followed with the Islamic government of Iran. So this is a great time to share the gospel with Muslims. They're seeking, they're hungry, and they know they're sinful. They know this God is distant, and they cannot. They're just trying to buy His favor. So about Iran, it's a different story, Kerby. With Iranians, the simplest message of the gospel come to Christ. Let me share you this. On Friday, we have a 24/7 channel, of course, satellite channel. We go over the heads of the mullahs. The signal comes from the sky, and the government cannot stop it. So we go over the heads of mullahs into millions of homes and share the gospel, share the love of Christ with them who are hungry. Now, last Friday, just a few days ago, we have a live church service on Fridays because that's their day off. And after I share a sermon, I usually go to a Zoom room. This is like a lobby. Meet the pastor, pray with the pastor, ask questions. I went there for 2 hours after the church service. Can you believe it? For 2 hours, Kerby, I was leading Muslims to Christ one by one.
Wow.
And that is amazing, which I'm so excited. You ask any missionaries who work among Muslims, they will say, this is supernatural. This is miraculous. What I'm talking about is this. They came, they wanted Jesus, and they had no questions. What? Muslim having no questions? You expect, hey, how about Islam? Why do you say Jesus is God? I mean, those are common questions that Muslims ask. But for 2 hours, I let people, I asked them questions to make sure that they know what they're doing, but they did not. One of them was saying, as I was listening to your sermon, I felt like somebody is planting flowers in my mind. Wow. Another one saying, as I was watching your sermon, I was having dinner because it's night at Iran. I was eating dinner and I stopped. I couldn't eat anymore. Why? Because I felt full of joy and peace of God. So they come on this Zoom. Any questions? No, I just want Jesus. That's the work of the Holy Spirit in Iran. We are at the historical time in Iran. The Lord promises in Jeremiah 49:38 that Iran will be a Christian nation. He says in Jeremiah 49:38, I will set my throne in Elam. So this is happening, Kerby, and it's happening fast, that Iranians are coming to Christ, and the King Jesus becomes the king of their hearts and the king of their lives. And once they come to Christ, they are on fire for the Lord. They're not afraid. There is a history being made in Iran, and I ask your audience, pray about this revival in Iran, because it's going to impact the Middle East and the whole world. And if you want to join us, be a history maker, this is the time to make history for the Lord in the Middle East through Iran.
Well, again, fastest growing church right there in Iran. And let's, if we can, for just a minute, since you are alluding to that, on your website, you talk about some of the political issues. And we, as you know, Dr. Shariat, oftentimes talk about politics. And right now, the Islamic regime is facing a bad economy. Of course, it's a really corrupt government. There's been a lot of opposition from the people in the streets. And then even the military threat from President Trump with the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. This is not a good time to be a leader in Iran, and I do believe that whether a revolution or a revival breaks out, something is about to happen in Iran. What are your thoughts?
Yes, the Iranian government is at its weakest point. It lost all its proxies, the power in the Middle East. They've lost it. They've lost their power with the people. They don't have the back of, the support of the people. So that's what Trump is taking advantage of that. Trump is a deal maker. I don't see a full-fledged war coming because neither side really want that. And but they're talking about it. Iran is saying, hey, we're making nuclear bomb if you don't talk and you don't give us what we want. And Trump says, you have two choices. Either you talk or we attack you. And they say, no, we don't want neither. We don't want to talk to you, and we don't want to. There will be no war. So there's a lot of these going on, but in reality, the Iranian government is very weak. They pretend to be strong. As an example, just 2-3 months ago, Israeli jets attacked Iran. They destroyed the radars and the defense system of Iran. Not one of the jets, one of the fighters were shut down. Iran pretends to be strong, but it's weak. Now, the most dangerous thing, Kerby, is this, and we need to pray. There is a saying in Farsi, a cornered cat acts like a lion. So the danger is that the Iranian government feels hopeless, and there would have no solution, no response except the nuclear bomb. That's the only danger. Otherwise, they cannot match Israel. They cannot match U.S. if they get in a fight, and they know it.
So again, just a great opportunity for prayer. Certainly, we should pray not only for the believers there in Iran, but pray for our president and some of the other issues that are unfolding. And if people want to contact you, we have a link to the website because in some respects, we have certainly recognized the ministry that you have through Iran Alive Ministries. But if people want to participate with you, how can they do so?
Yes, we're in Dallas. If you're in the area, come and visit, see what we're doing. But going on our website, get to know what we're doing. And even better and easier way is to do this, to text the word Iran, I-R-A-N, to this number. You know, when you want to text somebody, you put the phone number. Don't put the phone number. Put this number, 85789, 85789. And text the word I-R-A-N, Iran. And you will get a set of links. Links to great testimonies will encourage you. A link to our website, and I encourage you to sign up. At the least, is you will be encouraged of knowing what God is doing and hear great testimonies. And of course, if the Lord leads you, come and join us to disciple a nation and support us financially.
Well, again, I appreciate you being on the program. Again, the first article there, which will give you more information about Dr. Hormoz Shariat, is one on Here is What You Need to Know About Ramadan. It's the first article on our website. You can follow all the links. And as always, thank you for joining us and look forward to the next opportunity.
God bless you, Kerby. You're doing a great work for the Lord.
Going to take a break, and as we go to the break, let me just mention that this time next week, we'll be talking, matter of fact, one of those will be with Joel Rosenberg about what is going on in the Middle East. And, of course, Truth Team is on the way. So, again, we would encourage you to be watching your email for some of the material we've been sending out. Of course, you can visit the website, pointofview.net. That's where you can find out more about this ministry, which is, again, Iran Alive Ministries and Dr. Hormoz Shariat. Come back from the break. We're going to get into some things happening at the border. But, again, I hope that you will join with us even before the week starts next week because we can't do it without you. Lots of great material, all of it available at the website. And one more time, I just mentioned again this booklet that we've produced in the past on the whole issue of Islam, a biblical point of view on Islam. I'd love to give it to you. If you have not received a copy, we can send it to you either digitally, we'd need your email, or else we can send you a printed copy and we'd need your address. And you can just contact us by email and we'll send it off. Well, let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
Well, Truth Team Week is just about here, and we need your help. First of all, will you please pray for Point of View? Your prayers are the foundation for all that we do, and honestly, the reason for any success we have. Second, consider helping us get a head start on our Truth Team fundraising goal. Point of View can't bring a biblical perspective to the tough issues of our day without your support. And a biblical worldview is needed in this culture more than ever. Our goal for Truth Team Week, which begins on Monday, is to raise $150,000. But you can help us get a head start by giving now. Give today so we can kick off our Truth Team fundraiser in a historic way and bring biblical truth to this nation in need. Give online at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Come back now to an issue that we've discussed many times before, border security and immigration. On the one hand, we certainly recognize the need to control our borders and to have an orderly immigration policy. On the other hand, I also want to point out that there have been times, especially the previous administration, where they have taken a piece of legislation, an act, a law, a bill, and redefined a word, maybe pulled it out of context. Matter of fact, that's a conversation we're going to have probably Friday on some other issues about deportation. But one of those which stuck around for a while was what is known as Title 42. Now, you have to go into the federal code to understand that, but I want to get into that because there was a suggestion or even a threat, depending on how you look at it, that maybe that would be reinstated. Title 42 was actually in existence when we had our pandemic, but we don't have a pandemic taking place now. To really understand a little bit more about this issue, this is our second article on the website, and it is written by Agustina Cid, who is a contributor to Young Voices. We've had a number of people from Young Voices on this program. She was born and raised in Argentina, immigrated to the United States, pursued a master's degree, which she received a master's degree in law from the University of Southern California, and joins us now by phone. So thank you for writing the article, and thank you for trying to explain what is going on.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Let's, if we can, explain the origin of Title 42. It was something a while back we were talking about. It sort of ended, and we haven't really discussed it since. But that was justified at the time because we had a pandemic, and it was sort of a pandemic-era border policy, wasn't it?
Yes, correct. So Title 42, like you correctly mentioned earlier, refers to a part of the U.S. legal code that deals with public health, among other things. But in the last few years, it's been referred to as, part of the pandemic response, and it's been used as part of the pandemic response when it comes to, it's been made kind of like a border policy.
And so, again, what we are talking about is something that was, at the time, maybe justifiable, but it's different than Title VIII or a variety of other things, because what it did, if I understand it, would say that it would allow you to expel migrants at the border just simply on the concern of them having a dangerous infectious disease. Is that true?
Yes, that's correct. So it permits the quick expulsion of migrants at the border on the grounds, like you said, that they might spread a dangerous infectious disease. A few years ago, it was COVID, obviously. And also, part of what this policy does is prevents migrants from applying for asylum at the border as well.
So again, one of the articles here, and I might just say that you co-authored this article, talks about the fact that reinstating this is not backed by any data. In other words, we do have some outbreaks. We've been recently talking about measles. We've talked about tuberculosis. But in most of these cases, we're really not talking about something that is necessary at the border because we're not dealing with COVID-19. Can you kind of help us out with that?
Yes, so essentially, in order to invoke Title 42, the CDC has to determine that migrants, in this case in the southern border, pose a public health risk. That is, that they bring some sort of dangerous infectious disease, such as, like you said, tuberculosis, at a rate that would make it really hard for U.S. public health officials to contain the threat of that infectious disease, right? But while there are outbreaks currently going on in the United States for measles, for example, there is no evidence of migrants at the U.S. southern border bringing in any sort of infectious disease that would make it really hard for public health officials to identify or contain. So part of what my co-author, who is an expert in infectious disease, part of what he says that there are several requirements to declare a public health emergency in lines of these are the requirements that would need to go into declaring a public health emergency at the southern border. it would have to be that the disease should be very severe, significantly severe, like, for example, like measles or tuberculosis. The disease should not have a simple countermeasure. For example, there shouldn't be a vaccine or a treatment that is very efficient and that is easily available. And the event of importation risks, meaning that the fact that people are coming from abroad with this disease, should be epidemiologically significant. That means that it really does pose a risk of infecting people that otherwise wouldn't have been infected if this person hadn't come from abroad with this disease. The issue here is that there is no data backing any of these claims that would go into declaring the southern border, migrants from the southern border, a public health risk. So the problem here is that if this invocation of Title 42 actually goes into, Title 42 is actually invoked, there wouldn't be any scientific reasons or evidence behind it, and that is worrisome.
Yes. And again, I did not know till I read your article. And again, I want to thank your co-author for digging some of that up, because we have talked about the measles outbreak. But when you look at where some of those actually centered, one, of course, is a migrant center there in Chicago. Another one, of course, we have talked about here. We broadcast from the state of Texas, but that came from Venezuela. And in some respects, most of those have to do with unvaccinated individuals. So it does seem to me that in an orderly immigration process, if people are coming here legally, we certainly can vet them in a number of ways. Make sure that they're not linked to a terrorist organization. Make sure that they may have been vaccinated for that particular disease or show no symptoms of that. I mean, you think about the people that got off of the ships at Ellis Island. Back then, we didn't have the kind of medicine that we have today. We didn't have the kind of medical diagnosis that we have today, but we recognized how valuable it would be to make sure that we weren't bringing a disease in. But we are not talking about a COVID-19 kind of pandemic anymore. And so to reinstate Title 42 is sort of almost seems like you're grasping at straws, doesn't it look like?
Yes, to me, it really is. I agree. There's really no evidence, and I don't have a training in epidemiology, but my colleague who wrote the article with me does, and he's one of the most important experts on this topic, and he really does say there is no evidence that that migrants are bringing in this disease. The issue with the outbreaks currently going on are due to Americans, native-born Americans, and people inside the territory already not getting vaccinated against measles, for instance. So, yes, I think that this is basically, honestly, I see it as a way to kind of like try to make the public afraid of immigrants, like a little bit. I see it as a little bit of like fear mongering, saying that, attempting to declare that migrants pose an infectious disease risk, a public health risk. I think this is not merited, and I think honestly that it's a way to, villainize immigrants and, it's an attempt to try to make the general public afraid of immigrants, and this is all in the context of the crackdown on immigration that we're currently experiencing.
I do want to talk about some other issues related to that, but one I thought I'd pick out is this article, which goes on for 3 pages, so people can read it in its entirety, has a couple of links. And one that I wanted to talk about is that even when we had the COVID-19 pandemic, the Title 42 policy didn't work. And I think we, of course, talked about that. This sort of gets us into the pandemic and the vaccine and the virus and all the rest. But the link takes you to the Cato Institute, which is sort of a conservative, very libertarian website, but it talks about the fact that Title 42 failed when it was even supposed to help us fight COVID-19. And more importantly, the argument from the writer there of Cato was saying that it should not be extended again. So even when it was used and it could have been justified, I think that was a questionable justification even back then, it really didn't work. And that's something which I appreciate you and your author pointing out, because that's just one more thing we've learned now in the post-COVID-19 scenario, haven't we?
Yes, absolutely. So it didn't really, so when Title 42 was implemented during the pandemic, it didn't really do anything to curb the the spread of COVID-19, but also as a border measure as such. Sometimes these measures are taken to allegedly, secure the border. But in fact, the data after a few years of Title 22 being the policy at the border shows that it failed to control the flow of migrants at the border, and in fact increased the number of people that were able to evade detection at all at the border.
Yeah, I want to come back to that in just a minute.
Yeah, the gotaways, exactly.
I'm coming to a break, so let me come back to that because that's another part of that. It actually increased the number of gotaways, which we'll talk about, and also this really was an attempt to achieve a different policy, and I think that's a good reason why we should reject it. We'll come back and spend just a few more minutes talking about this. You can read the article and the links. I would highly recommend that you look to, and we'll be back right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. We have Agustina Vergara Cid with us as we talk about this particular article. But I do want to get to one of those, Agustina, that you wrote in The Hill about the immigration gold card, because that's something that surfaced quite a bit. The Secretary of Commerce, Howard Letnick, was talking about that the other day, and you've talked about how that could be a huge winner with some changes. But we'll get to that in just a minute, because you did mention that, again, Title 42, since you knew that you were going to be turned away, actually had the reverse impact. And I've talked about before that oftentimes certain policies have the unintended consequences. And one of those is that when we had Title 42, it increased the number of gotaways. Now, some of those gotaways are individuals that came here for a better life. Some of those gotaways turn out to be individuals that intend us harm. But having a situation where migrants are intentionally trying to evade border protection and couldn't be vetted for either disease or criminality is a real problem. And that was one of those, if you will, unintended consequences of Title 42, wasn't it?
Yes, that's correct. So when Title 42 ended in, I think it was May 2023. It was.
Mm-hmm. That's what I looked it up.
Yeah, the number of gotaways. This is people that are able to cross the border completely undetected by Border Patrol. They may visually see them, but they cannot. They don't encounter that person and are not able to process them and know who they are. Right. So that number of people who were able to cross in that way fell from about 2,600 per day to just about 800 per day after Title 42 ended. And there are a few reasons for this, but including that when people are expelled under Title 42, this is a very quick, swift removal. So there are not many consequences to being expelled at the border, and people tend to be able to, just turn around and try to do it again and try to do it again and try to do it again. Eventually, they are successful.
Right.
But when with the regular system, that would be Title A, the current, the normal state of affairs. There are other consequences, including, for instance, that there's a reentry ban if you try to cross again to the United States, and there are potential criminal charges for repeat entries. There's obviously the process of deportation. It makes it much more onerous to try to cross the border versus Title 22, making it essentially they kick you out and then with virtually no consequences, and then you can come back in.
Let me again mention that this is about a 3-page article. It has a lot of links that may just educate you on some of the issues that we really hardly ever talked about. And again, I wanted to cover that. But I thought for just a minute, we might talk about an article that you wrote in The Hill, because a lot of people are hearing about this idea of a gold card. Now, what it is a kind of a new visa that would replace what's called EB-5 visa. But your argument is that it might help streamline the immigration system. It would also maybe attract the best and the brightest to come to this country. I mean, look at the benefit we enjoy right now as somebody of your caliber leaving Argentina, which I feel sorry because somebody of your gifts probably could help that country, but we are benefiting from you coming here. And this idea of a gold card through legal immigration could really provide some opportunities for us in the country, don't you think?
Yes, I think so. I think the gold card as a concept is a really good idea. Our current immigration system, it's really, I call it Kafkaesque because it really is really hard to immigrate legally to the United States. That's one of the reasons why there's issues at the southern border, because the vast majority of people don't have a way to immigrate legally to the United States. And even those who do have a way to immigrate legally to the United States, the process is incredibly convoluted, very hard to do, and only about 3% of the people that want to be able to come here, peaceful people I'm talking about, right? People who want to come here to work and produce and be part of American society, only about 3% of those people are able to secure legal permanent residency in the United States. And what the gold card would do, I mean, we don't have a lot of details about how it will work, but essentially it's you pay a price for the gold card, and at this moment it's a $5 million price tag, and we can discuss that because it's a little bit steep for most people.
I'd say so, yes.
But if we are able to, pay for your legal residency to the United States, which is not the same as citizenship, then that would potentially streamline the process, make it much easier, and it would allow a lot of people that are not coming to the United States, like really high-skilled people that are not coming because it's really hard, to be able to do so and to be vetted and, go through the whole process of legal immigration. And it would also potentially, if the program is extended to reach people who are currently, peaceful people who want to come here to work that are currently crossing the southern border, then if those people are able to come here legally, then they would mass at the border. They would be able to get vetted, and for things like criminality, national security threats, infectious disease, like we were just discussing, and be able to, come here, and American employers will be able to hire them, and it will be really a much better situation than what we currently have.
And again, a lot of those individuals would want to come here that could afford that because they're entrepreneurs, but they are just stifled by the burdensome regulations, whether it's in Europe or in India, or maybe they're coming from China, Hong Kong, whatever it might be, and that would be an opportunity. Again, you point out, of course, the price tag is unrealistic, but maybe we can learn more about that. But I just wanted people to know that you're writing on a variety of issues, not just illegal immigration, but legal immigration, and hope we can call on you again to maybe get into some more of these issues, because these are relevant topics that we certainly try to address. And if people find themselves wanting to know a little bit more about you, they can click on the picture we have there, and then you at Young Voices have all sorts of articles that you have written, two of which we've just mentioned in passing. And so, Agustina, I appreciate you being with us today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope we can talk again soon.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into some of the issues in the news. First article that I'm going to focus on by Ron Johnson: is this any way to run a budget? And the answer, of course, is no. Can we finally get to the point where we have a balanced budget? Well, I don't know if we're going to get there yet. But can we at least have a budget for the federal government? I think that might be asking too much, but at least one senator thinks maybe we could actually do that. As we go to a break, since we're talking about these jobs, I just mentioned my commentary today is talking about the worker gap. You've heard me talk about this before, that Mike Rowe, host of Dirty Jobs, basically has said that we have two problems: a skills gap and a will gap. Now, the skills gap is we do need individuals that have the right degrees or training to put them, especially in some of these high-tech jobs. That's where this gold card might come in and very significantly. But even at the lower levels, we have blue-collar skills that would require not a college degree, but some mechanical ability and training. And yet in the high schools, we've been taking out and removing shop classes. So he's talking a great deal about the skills gap, but there's the other part of that, and that's the will gap. As you've heard me mention before, we have millions of young men who are not working and not looking for work. And if indeed President Trump is successful in bringing manufacturing jobs back to America, that's another article I have, which we'll talk about in the next hour. Who's going to fill those jobs? I think we need to change some of our attitudes about work. And so that's my commentary today, which you can find, and I hope that you'll find it to be helpful and useful. And it's on our website at pointofview.net. Let's take a break, though. We'll get into some other issues in the news right after this.
The Bible tells us not to worry. And yet, there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes, even knowing what to pray can be difficult. And that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week, you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View will continue after this.
Thank you, Kerby. I really appreciate your program. You cover a lot of issues that a lot of us think about, I'm sure. And this is the first time I've ever called in, so I appreciate your input, too.
Oh, I thank God for what you're doing on Point of View. You guys have more influence across this country than I believe any of them in terms of tackling the issues and getting the truth out to Americans. It's getting to the point where truth just is bottled up on every hand. Every time you turn around, there's another big bottleneck against truth. I hope your listeners realize what Point of View is doing and supports Point of View in every possible way you can.
You know, I can't go to Washington. I can't do those things, so the only way that I can help is the way that God has provided for me and to give some of that back to you guys. So, like you said, partnering with Point of View because, you know, you can't do it alone. Thank you very much for what you guys do. Believe me, it's a needed thing, and I just hope everybody certainly would get on the bandwagon with you.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to talk about, is it too much to ask for the federal government to have a budget? We're not even talking about a balanced budget. Yeah, it'd be nice to have a balanced budget. After all, every 50 of the states have to have a balanced budget. Federal government does not have a balanced budget and does not even have to have a balanced budget, unfortunately, because it can also print money. But I think as we go through this particular piece by Senator Ron Johnson, you might say, who is he? He is a senator from Wisconsin, a Republican. He asks a very good question. Is this any way to run a budget? Now, let me, before we get into the details here, give you some background. First of all, the House of Representatives has on occasion been able to pass a budget, which is one of the most unwieldy ways to do it, because essentially the budget is distributed to 12 different entities and then brought together in one single budget. That is a problem right off the bat, and we've had members of Congress on this program talking about how we could simplify and streamline that in a way that other states do that. So at least give partial credit where credit is due, that sometimes the House of Representatives has been able to pass a budget. The reality is the Senate has not. Now, most of that happened under Democratic leadership, but you now have Republicans in a position of leadership. And unless something changes, we're still passing what are called continuing resolutions, CRs. And that one was passed just the other day. So that at least gets us to September 30th. The other issue that you might remember me talking about, and he says that when he's asked individuals, how much does the federal government spend? I hope I've said this enough times now that you have that number in your head. But if you don't, get out something to write with. The federal government this year will spend $7 trillion. And, of course, only brings in about $4 or $5 trillion, depending. I've always said about $5 trillion, but I'm seeing one place here where it says maybe closer to $4+ trillion. And you can, again, just take the zeros off and say, let's use the 5 and the 7. Imagine if you were making $50,000 a year, and every year you were spending $70,000 a year, and you had credit card debt of $360,000. Just take the zeros off, and you can see what we're dealing with, $36 trillion debt, and you can begin to see some of the problems that we have. So with that as a background, let's hear what Senator Ron Johnson has to say. He says, unlike the federal government, families and private sector businesses have to keep spending in line with earnings. To do so, they budget, estimating what the income will be and making sure their planned expenditures don't exceed that. He then goes on to say, look, I came from the private sector, and I know the time, effort, and detail businesses put into preparing budgets. If the numbers are good, the budget review meeting can be a breeze. If not, managers have a lot of explaining to do when it comes to spending American taxpayer dollars and money we borrow to cover massive deficit spending. The analysis and oversight by lawmakers is woefully inadequate. He goes on to say that 535 members of Congress, that's 435 members in the House, 100 members in the Senate, could be considered the board of directors, the news media as the watchdog auditor of a financial entity that spends more than $7 trillion a year. This is the line that really got my attention. I might even put it in a commentary. When I asked my colleagues, these are fellow U.S. senators and the media covering this, a few years ago during an omnibus spending debate, how much the federal government spent in total, no one could offer an answer. These are the people spending your money, and there were people in that Senate meeting, and there were people in the media that could not come up with the answer, which is now $7 trillion. Sleep well, America. That shows you the problem we have right now. He goes on to say the lack of attention, and this lack of attention has allowed spending to soar 63% from $4.4 billion in fiscal 2019 to a $7.2 billion, or actually, I should say $4.4 trillion. He was doing $4,447 billion, but $4.4 trillion to $7.2 trillion, and pointing out that there are a number of ways that we can begin to deal with that, to actually, if nothing else, return to pre-pandemic level of spending. But that's not what happened under the Biden administration. It began under the first Trump administration and then exploded under the Biden administration. He gives you all the numbers and points out what Bill Clinton was spending, what Barack Obama was spending, all the way up. So you can get an idea of all of that. But he says, how can we solve the problem? Okay, smart guy, you've suggested we've got a problem. How do we solve it? Here's his solution. A group of senators representing various factions of the Republican conference and a similar group of House Republicans should join a budget review panel with members of the administration to listen to representatives of their departments explain every line item expenditure. This has never been done. And it's almost kind of like what some states do with they call zero-based budgeting. You have to justify what you do each year. Now, the problem is we always assume that if you spent it, that you would need more. But off the air, we've been talking about some of these budgets where if you don't spend it in one year, the next year they say, well, then you don't need it. Well, no, we didn't have a conference that year. We didn't have a need that year. We didn't have a flood that year, whatever it might be. And this kind of almost bizarre accounting principle is making it very difficult to have a budget. But his suggestion is, and it seems like a lot of work, but he just run the numbers. He says that the 2025 budget has 2,481 individual expenditure line items. These could be reviewed by various congressional committees and get the information needed to draft legislation for rescission packages, we've talked about this before, and a fulfillment of budget reconciliation instructions. Yes, I know 2,400 line items is a lot, but if you divide it up among not only 100 U.S. senators, but another 435 members of the House, even just looking at half and half, since about half are Republicans and half are Democrats, you could come up with something that then looks like a real budget with people having looked at the line items and actually coming up with a budget that looks something like what maybe you do in your home, certainly those of you running a business that you've done for your business, or for those of you in churches or Christian organizations have done for your ministry. So again, he asked the question, is this any way to run a budget? Maybe it's time to actually get serious about a federal budget. That's another way that we might eventually get to a balanced budget. And it has been a long, long time since we've had a balanced federal budget. And if we don't want to keep loading more and more debt on the next generations, this maybe is a way forward. So it's our first article, along with the other two articles we mentioned last hour, for you to read. And we'll come back and talk about some other solutions to these problems right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
President Trump wants manufacturing reinvigorated by bringing jobs back to the U.S. That is great for America and great for American workers, but who's going to fill those jobs? The latest numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics show 7.6 million job openings along with 6.8 million unemployed workers. You might ask why those millions of unemployed workers aren't snapped up in those millions of job openings. Mike Rowe, host of Dirty Jobs, says that the problem of filling those jobs is twofold. He says we have a skills gap. We also have a will gap. The skills gap is the disparity between the skills an employer expects their employees to have and the actual skills employees possess. It is certainly true that jobs in the medical field require a science degree and jobs in big tech require a computer science degree, but most of the blue-collar skills don't require a degree but require some mechanical ability and training. Unfortunately, lots of high schools remove shop classes that could have been training the next generation of Americans who like to work with their hands. Instead, students have been convinced they should go to college, take out massive student loans to get a degree that may not even prepare them for a future job. The will gap is best illustrated by what economist Nicholas Eberstadt refers to as the flight from work. His Washington Post op-ed 3 years ago lamented that at the time there were 7 million men who were not working and not looking for work. The number of non-working men has only dropped a percentage point in the last few years. If the president is successful in bringing jobs back to America, pastors, parents, and other leaders must encourage the next generation to go to work. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of genetic engineering, go to viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. Viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
In fact, once again, one of the articles I was going to get to a little bit later, but since we have a news item that connects up to it, I thought I'd just mention that now the Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, has now indeed charged 3 individuals on federal charges for what we're now starting to have people call the Tesla terrorists. And so these 3 individuals have been charged, and I suspect they will be probably very easily found guilty. But in addition to that, one of the stories that just came out, in addition to those 3 people being charged, is of 80 Tesla vehicles in Canada dealerships that were destroyed and damaged. And so this whole issue of what has oftentimes been referred to as Tesla terrorists has even gone across the border. Now, you can understand that some people might be upset. You can't justify any of the actions that have been taking place, but it really almost is hard to understand why somebody in Canada upset about something happened in the United States would feel that that was justifiable in destroying 80 cars in a Tesla dealership. And you have to hope that whatever you would call the Attorney General in Canada would actually take action against the destruction of property. Again, I know that there is no sanity when people become so angry that they can't even see the logic or the illogic of what they're doing. But even if you disagree with what Elon Musk is doing, and I think most Americans applaud what he is doing, how in the world can that be justifiable in terms of destroying one of the most premier car companies in the world? And yet that is going to affect not Elon Musk, he's a billionaire, but it's going to affect the jobs and the owners and the mechanics and all of that associated with Tesla. So nevertheless, the issue that came out the other day from the Attorney General is Molotov cocktails and gunfire at a facility in Las Vegas. Resist was spray painted on the side of a building, and this is where the Attorney General Pam Bondi said this is clearly a case of domestic terrorism. She then posted a number of things. We have charged multiple people. Get ready, more is coming. The funding is one thing we're looking at. That's the big question. Who's funding some of this? We're coming after you. We believe these are organized. These are not individuals that are out there on their own. And so, again, that is part of the argument. So we're going to certainly follow that story. Matter of fact, one of the articles I have for our guests around the roundtable tomorrow, which will be Kelly Shackelford and Liberty McCarter, is just where does some of this anger come from? We're not just talking about Tesla here, or even Elon Musk. Think about all the anger about the pro-Hamas report of various supports, all the way back to the burning of so many different buildings and police stations and everything. And this is, I think, again, a real significant issue that we're going to have to address for some time. The good news is that the Attorney General, and it looks like the Justice Department, is willing to take some action, and we'll see where that takes us in the future. But while I was quoting from Pam Bondi, who's, of course, the Attorney General, I thought I'd quote also from the Secretary of Treasury, that's Scott Bessent. And one of the lines here is, who knew that the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, was a comedian, and was so funny, because one of the questions that came was about an interview that he did with NBC's Kirsten Welker, who had at the time asked if the Treasury Secretary could guarantee that there won't be a recession. And his response was, no, I can't, but I can't guarantee that her news program is going to be on a year from now, which is sort of becoming one of those very sad gags about what is happening to some of the legacy media. But in the process of that interview that he was doing, he also pointed out something that maybe hasn't been very well covered, and that is you had a couple of these whistleblowers that worked with the Internal Revenue Service, and here's what he said. The special agents at the Internal Revenue Service who blew the whistle on the Biden administration's preferential treatment towards Hunter Biden during an investigation into the former first son's tax returns will be promoted to a key leadership position within the U.S. Department of Treasury. These IRS whistleblowers are Gary Shapley and Joseph Ziegler, whose testimony really helped squash Hunter Biden's sweetheart deal. You remember that sweetheart plea deal, which was, I think, so outrageous. And so they are scheduled to start work this week as senior advisors for IRS reform to the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's office. So just another one of those little pieces of information that maybe you'll only hear here on Point of View. You might have heard it on Fox News, but probably isn't being covered anywhere else. Which brings me to something else I wanted to focus on. If you were listening a couple of days ago, I pointed out the concern that came from some Christian groups that were saying that because President Trump actually paused some of the foreign aid coming out through USAID, that was hurting a few of those organizations. And I mentioned, I mentioned Food for the Poor, wasn't it one of those? One of those was World Relief. Well, another one affected was Samaritan's Purse. And I have in front of me now this post that came from the CEO of Samaritan's Purse, Franklin Glenn Graham, in which Samaritan's Purse has now confirmed that the $19 million that they were supposed to receive in USAID funds have now been released to their ministry. So some of the concerns about how this is affecting ministries have been resolved. Samaritan's Purse, if you're not familiar, and I was unfamiliar with some of this myself, actually have funding grants that come from USAID. Here's what happens. Samaritan's Purse goes overseas, in this particular case, providing life-saving aid to people in Sudan. And so they pay for the supplies, they pay for the staff in advance, and then the plan is for the government to reimburse them to the order, in this case, of $19 million. And actually, Time magazine at the time had reported that only about $13 million of that had been frozen. So some of that had actually been available. But this was allowing them to continue to doing their work in Sudan, in South Sudan, and in the Congo. So anyway, I just wanted to point out that some of the concerns I raised earlier in the week are starting to be resolved. And that makes sense because, if nothing else, that's what you would expect. I've also been a little bit surprised because those of us that give to these different ministries maybe naively assume that not only did 100% of our dollars go to relief, but that we were the primary or maybe even the exclusive source of those funds, and we're finding out some things we didn't know before. So let me again just mention that particular issue that I raised earlier in the week from a couple of individuals, Matthew Sorens and a few others, that seems like it is now being resolved, and that's good news because for every one of those particular grants from USAID that went to really questionable things, there were other funds that went to very responsible things. And that's why I'm excited that when you have the now Secretary of State overseeing USAID, that would be Marco Rubio, I think that's going to be an improvement that will last for many years. Just before I take a break, let me again mention that my commentary today is about the worker gap, just that whole issue of not only having a skills gap, but a wills gap, and a real need for us to maybe spend more and more time talking about what is a biblical view of work. I've already offered our booklet on Islam. I certainly could mention we've had in the past a book on the subject of work, but I think we're even going to perhaps do a future Outlook magazine on this topic, because after all, President Trump has been somewhat successful in bringing some manufacturing jobs back to this country. Some automakers are saying now we'll build some of these cars here in the United States because of the threat of tariffs. But if we bring the jobs back to America, we need Americans to do those jobs. Make sense? So that's why we'll be talking about that in the future. It will be a future Outlook magazine. And one more reason for you to click on that button that says Anchored to Truth, because next week is Truth Team, which will be talking about the fact that one of the benefits of supporting Point of View, you'll receive the Outlook magazine. And if you join at $1 a day, $30 a month, you'll receive not only the Outlook magazine, but also the booklets that we send out on a monthly basis. Let's take a break. We have a lot of things to cover still. I'll come back with that right after this.
Well, Truth Team Week is just about here, and we need your help. First of all, will you please pray for Point of View? Your prayers are the foundation for all that we do, and honestly, the reason for any success we have. Second, consider helping us get a head start on our Truth Team fundraising goal. Point of View can't bring a biblical perspective to the tough issues of our day without your support. And a biblical worldview is needed in this culture more than ever. Our goal for Truth Team Week, which begins on Monday, is to raise $150,000. But you can help us get a head start by giving now. Give today so we can kick off our Truth Team fundraiser in a historic way and bring biblical truth to this nation in need. Give online at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Next thing I want to talk about is Mike Huckabee. First of all, Mike Huckabee's been on the program many times before. He has been selected to be the ambassador to Israel, and yet some people are saying, why hasn't he been confirmed? And I think in some respects, the piece by Star Parker that I've posted illustrates the problem. He has been postponed in large part because of pressure from the Democrats. What's the problem? Well, number one, he's an evangelical minister, and number two, he likes Israel. So that's kind of the 1-2 punch. And I thought it would just be helpful because it illustrates right now that, again, there is a real difference, even in the United States Senate, between Republican senators and Democratic senators. And I think this illustrates only so well. Star Parker says, look, confirmation of President Donald Trump's nominee to the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, has been held up in the Senate. Word now is the hearings will be held next week. What's holding things up? Pressure from Democrats, of course, she says. Now, if you're not familiar with him, of course, he is probably very well known as an individual that's been on TV, and certainly the father of Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who was the press secretary for Donald Trump. I guess that's a third strike against him, too. So you can see he's got a lot of problems because, indeed, he was a two-term governor. He ran for the presidency. He's an evangelical Christian. He's a minister. But more than that, he loves the state of Israel because she talks about the fact that he's had countless missions to Israel, and she's even been on one of those. So what's the problem with the Democrats? She says the problem is that Mike Huckabee is a friend of Israel, and many Democrats are not. What's driving this schism, she says? Open any news commentary site these days, you find a number of soul-searching columns trying to figure out what's wrong with the Democratic Party. They were defeated across the board in 2024. Now Democrats are trying to regroup, to rebuild. In order to do this, they need to understand what's wrong. And the point is that here, she says, is where Republicans, at least in the Senate and in the House, and it's also true, I think, in the House, between Republican and Democrats, part company, one word, religion. She says more and more Americans are leaving behind the principles of the Bible. That's true. Per Gallup in 1960, 2% of Americans said they had no religion. In 2023, that was up to 22%. The so-called nones or the unaffiliated certainly are the case. But here's the difference. According to Gallup, 61% of Republicans say they are religious compared to 37% of Democrats. So twice as many by percentage of Republicans have some kind of religious commitment compared to Democrats. And as she points out, Democrats have become the party of woke, transgender, abortion, and big government. And she says, of course, anyone is free to choose what they believe. But again, to think this means there is no truth, well, sorry about that. And she says, okay, back to Mike Huckabee and Israel. The reason Democrat support for Huckabee is weak is because Democrat support for Israel is weak. And Democrat support for Israel is weak because Democrat support for religion is weak. And so in some respects, although I'm using Mike Huckabee as the visual illustration of that, you can see that an individual that I don't think would have been that controversial maybe even a decade ago in the Republican or Democratic Party, certainly not in the House or Senate, is kind of intriguing about that. And in the latest Gallup poll of February 2025, so taking the most recent one, 33%, one-third of Democrats said they are mostly favorable to Israel compared to 83%, 8 out of 10 of Republicans. And 45% of Democrats said they are favorable to Palestinians compared to 18%. And she says, let's be clear, when you say you're supporting Palestinians, you're really thinking about Hamas. So this schism that we have seen for some time, first on religion and second on Israel, and I think the two overlap dramatically, are one of the reasons why Mike Huckabee is still waiting for his confirmation hearings. And this has been basically slowed down and maybe even stopped by the Democrats in the United States Senate. So we'll see where that takes us. But I use Mike Huckabee not necessarily as one example, but of a larger issue that we need to understand in terms of religion and in terms of Israel, and that is showing its head once again in the U.S. Senate. Let me also go to my last article here, and after our break, we'll get into some other topics. And this one by Selena Zito, I quoted from her the other day, but this one is very interesting. Rebuilding the Rust Belt one company at a time. Again, if you go to the website today, recognize that I'm talking about the desire by this president, Donald Trump, to bring jobs back to the United States, or in some cases to build working opportunities here in the United States and use the tariffs to bring that back. And so this one is from the state of Pennsylvania. And if you go to the Keystone State, one of the stories is of a man by the name of Joe Mastranagello. I think that's how he says his name. And he's talking about this energy storage business that he has been building in western Pennsylvania. And the plan was originally to build the batteries in China and then ship them back to the United States. But he said, we quickly changed that to moving all the manufacturing back to the United States. By the way, does that sound familiar? Because it would be easier for us to scale up production. We ended up building a whole supply base to the point where 90% of the product made here comes from the United States. I think that's good news. He then is standing in the middle of one of the buildings in this massive 92-acre manufacturing site, and he says that for nearly 100 years, the building was occupied by men and women who worked at the Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing Company. Now, if you're not familiar, this was the site where you had Westinghouse and Tesla. This would be Nicholas Tesla, not the company, but the individual for whom the company is named, who are actually the ones that actually built this whole electronic function. Westinghouse, by the way, was the individual that convinced this Serbian by the name of Nikola Tesla to come and develop this induction motor for that. And so today, in some of those same warehouses, safe, efficient, and sustainable zinc-based long-duration energy storage systems are being built. And this is an attempt to produce them here in the United States. And it's also where 100 years ago, some of them were making semiconductors, and now you, of course, see them making their batteries, but they are different because he points out that our battery keeps running. You know, a lot of the batteries we're using right now are lithium batteries, and we've talked about the concerns about the fact that getting lithium, you need to get it from China, from Africa, other places. These batteries keep running. They don't degrade. They're fully recyclable, non-flammable, and there are no toxic materials. Whereas, of course, the lithium batteries are primary power sources for electric cars and trucks and things of that nature, but they're also used to store excess energy from solar panels. They're also used to power medical devices, electric bikes, scooters, hoverboards, drones, all sorts of things. But again, most of those batteries are made where? In China. You heard us talk about China yesterday. We're going to talk about China again tomorrow, interestingly enough. And so one of the things they're trying to do is produce batteries in the United States, which perhaps are safer, recyclable, and most importantly, non-flammable. Have you seen how some of these, again, these Tesla terrorists have set fire to these various Tesla batteries that have been in some of the cars and especially in the Tesla trucks. So again, I just thought we'd end this segment with just the fact that we do see the possibility of bringing these jobs back to the United States. Maybe the Rust Belt will no longer be a Rust Belt. Maybe we will once again make things here in this country. But if we're going to do that, those of you that are on school boards, those of you that are taxpayers for the public schools, need to talk to your high school counselors, your administrators, your faculty. It's time to maybe bring some of these shop classes back to the United States, to the high school areas, and to develop some of these trade schools and all the rest. Because if we're going to build things in this country, we need to have individuals who work with their hands, that have really good skills, mechanical ability, and training, so that we can do what we have been sending overseas for 2 or 3 decades. It's time to bring some of these jobs back to America, and it's also time for us to tell some of the younger Americans it's time to go to work. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for just a few more minutes, and first of all, I want to ask if you have ever seen the movie Big Short. Perhaps you've read the book Big Short by Michael Lewis, and that is what we're going to talk about for just a minute, because some people are starting to suggest maybe we're getting back into the same situation that was so economically devastating in 2008. Now, a lot of this comes from a viral video that is out there, and it comes out through TikTok, and I'm not really a TikTok person, but turns out that my daughter is, sent it to me. Then I've seen other people quoting it. It's by Tiffany Cianci. And I think, again, we don't know enough yet. I'm going to suggest that we need to know more about this, but it does have a cause for concern. Turns out Tiffany Cianci was actually looking at a very interesting phenomenon. We're seeing a number of companies that are making money and they're still filing for bankruptcy. Now, the one she was actually first looking at was Hooters. Okay, I know this is not a Hooters crowd, so got that. But it is also true for Joann's, if you like fabric and things like that, or Party City, you like going there for parties, or Big Lots. These are all the same kind of companies that are generating income, and they're all filing bankruptcy. And she is convinced that what she's uncovered is maybe similar to what happened in 2008. Okay, let me try to explain that for just a minute without getting into the deep weeds. And that is that these various companies have actually wanted to get what's called private equity. They get loans. And so those loans are something that is sort of the cost of doing business. But it turns out those loans are what are called adjustable rate loans. Well, when you get an adjustable rate loan and the interest rate is 1%, no problem. When the interest rate is 4 times what it was just a couple of years ago, because we've raised the interest rates. Who has done that? The Federal Reserve has raised the interest rates. You are starting to have a situation in which you're making money, money's coming in the door, but you don't have enough to pay off your adjustable rate loans. Does that make sense? That's kind of economics 101. Well, the level, according to her, of these adjustable rate loans, these private equity loans, is $3.8 trillion with a T. $3.8 trillion. And so for the last 3 years, these interest rates have come up higher and higher and higher. And so you have a situation, you may not care whether Hooters goes out of business, but I suspect many of you might be upset. I just went to the Joann's website, going out of business, bankrupt, Party City, Big Lots, whatever, going out of business. Again, you may not even go to some of those particular establishments, but you should be concerned because what begins to happen is a series of dominoes fall. Now, if you've ever seen the movie Big Short, that was illustrated in one way by having a Jenga number of pieces and pulling out some of the Jenga pieces, and eventually the thing goes. Now, at that time, of course, they were talking about all sorts of other issues related to that, subprime loans and all the rest. I think really to understand that, I think the film Big Short did a pretty good job of explaining what was going on. Well, if you go back to 2008, we're talking about 1.1 trillion loans that were subprime. You had another 1.3 trillion that were in housing, 3.8 trillion that were in home ownership. And you recognized that those could begin to affect the economy in some very significant ways. Just a few minutes ago, you heard me quote from the Treasury Secretary, who was asked at the time by NBC, can you predict whether or not there's going to be a recession? He says, I can't even predict whether NBC is going to be on the air next year, which I thought was a great line. But nevertheless, it illustrates the problem. Now, if you watch the video, it's almost worse than what Tiffany Cianci put out together, because she's pointed out that a lot of these companies are going bankrupt, and that's going to affect the retail stores. But there's another issue that you have to think about, and that is these stores rent space in commercial real estate, malls and shopping centers, retail districts, and all the rest. And if they go bankrupt, the landlords that hold the rents for all of those, guess what? They aren't able to pay their bills because they aren't getting any kind of payments. And so, again, there's, what is it, $2.7 trillion in commercial real estate loans that were due this last year and have to be refinanced. And, of course, the other day I talked about the need in some of this of refinancing even the national debt. Is it possible we're in the midst of some kind of really, again, perfect storm, although I'd want to call it an imperfect storm? And so there is a real concern about this nationwide. If you look overseas, it's even worse because we have a global economy right now that's in turmoil, about $5.5 trillion that was wiped out of some of the stock market. But just recently, I read that Germany had to change its constitution so that it could print another trillion, I guess it'd be Deutschmarks, in new debt. And so this is a time in which, again, you should be praying for the president, pray for the Secretary of Treasury, and, of course, I even talked about the Secretary of Commerce. These individuals find themselves having to have inherited a lot of things that were not their doing, but nevertheless, oftentimes, as we went through the 2024 campaign, the 2024 campaign said no matter who is president in February and March and April, these are some issues that the next president, whether it's Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, is going to have to address. And this is just one more of those issues that has surfaced. So we should be in prayer for our president and recognize how very fragile some of our economic circumstances are right now. And even though the stock market probably will go up, the price of eggs is going down, unemployment is down a little bit, inflation's down a little bit, there are some very concerning thunderclouds in the distance. And so all the more reason for us to pray for those in authority. And that's all the more reason to point you to a piece that we have on our website today, Pray for America. We have the most recent one coming out. And if you sign up, we send to you a prayer target every single week. And we would encourage you to find out more about that. We, of course, have the Viewpoints commentary I just mentioned. And one last time, just thought I would mention that we do have our link to Anchored to Truth, as you've been hearing us talk about. Next week will be our Truth Team. I'm looking forward to some of the great interviews and some of the guests that Steve Miller has put together for us. But most importantly, we're off to a great start, but we can't do it without you. So if you want to join with us even before we actually announce that on Monday, it's a great opportunity for you to do so as well. If you would like to know a little bit more about a couple of these issues, we've talked about what you need to know about Ramadan. Very good piece by Dr. Hormoz Shariat. Also one by Agustina Vergara Cid about infectious diseases. Of course, this piece by Senator Ron Johnson about is this any way to run a budget? Some pieces about the Tesla terrorist, the need to confirm Mike Huckabee, bless his heart, and even rebuilding the Rust Belt. Just a few issues we talked about today here on Point of View. As always, I want to thank Megan for her help engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow on our weekend edition right here on Point of View.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer, and that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner Pray for America right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in our land. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I really appreciate your program. I don't get to listen to it every day because I have to work, but it's really a blessing to me and to all of us.
Everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
I do appreciate Point of View and what you folks are doing. You really are doing a great job to educate and to help Christian folks do a better job to honor Christ in all that we do.
I just appreciate all you guys do. I mean, I learned so much, and it's amazing what you teach that I say to other people, and they look at me like, where did you hear that? So I appreciate you guys. So thank you for all you do.
I just turned your program on, and I want to just let you know how much I appreciate just getting the truth out.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.